What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is The Deep Dive, and we are in our final week, our last week of this series, resetting the church, and today, that's what we're talking about,
Right.
resetting the whole church.
We've been resetting other things. Today we're going to talk about church in general, the Christian church, but also specifically Hickory Flat and how we can live into that. So, some good stuff, some hard stuff.
Yeah. You ready to get into it?
Sure.
Let's go. Well, Dave, we haven't seen a lot of each other this weekend. You've been out of town. I had a birthday party. I kind of ditched a little early to get some stuff ready at the end of last week, and we had our first kind of like big soiree out back of our house after our renovations and stuff like that. So it was good to finally see it being used for the reason we did it. You know what I mean? Like, to have friends over, to have people coming and hanging out. And
was it good weather? I couldn't remember.
It was beautiful weather. I mean, Awesome. It was a little hot, but, for a pool day, it was a pool party for my Finley, and just a bunch of fun, craziness, kids everywhere, and
Nice.
Good times.
Yeah, we, as you know, took a real quick trip after church and drove up to Asheville, North Carolina, and, to see my son. We hung out downtown some, and it was fun, but it was a quick trip. His restaurant's closed on Monday, so that's always a really good time. And it's a pleasant drive, but a quick trip. I just got back a little while ago. So
yeah, like you're coming in hot.
Yeah,
Like just got back into the state, and you're here. So we're thankful for that. So let's get into it, shall we? Why don't you give us kind of a recap of your sermon Sunday, and then we'll dive into what we're going to talk about.
So the reset series, we have been paralleling our reset moment and looking at the Israelites in rebuilding the temple or building the second temple story. And so, I think it's good to also kind of look at the temple, where it came from. I think that can shed some light and maybe even bring us to a question that maybe we should answer. Mm-hmm. And so, originally, when the Ten Commandments were given to Moses, and the children were wandering around the desert. This is generations before the moments we're talking about in Haggai, but they God gave them some specific instructions about building what they called a tabernacle, but essentially it was this big tent. Very specific instructions in Exodus for
I
many
love the
chapters.
picture you showed. It was this Sunday, right?
Right.
Yeah. That I guess I didn't realize how specific it had to be.
It was very specific. They had the places, the Holy of Holies, and all of that where the Ark of the Covenant with the Ten Commandments was stored and all of that. And so wherever they went, as they were wandering around for 40 years before they went to the Promised Land, they brought the tabernacle with them and set it up at the center of their community and their camp. And so that had gone on. So when they went into to Israel and settled, it was still there, and it still moved around. It was actually in a couple of different cities,
Mm-hmm.
But David, King David, one night was sitting in his palace, and he got to thinking to himself. He said, God, you are residing in a tent while I have this beautiful, palace. I'm going to build a palace for you, a temple for you. And so originally, Nathan, who was a prophet, he was telling this to. Nathan said, oh, sure, go ahead. But then God gave Nathan a message for David, and it was basically, I don't need any fancy house. I've resided in the tent. I'm just more interested in people, keeping the covenant than that. But it didn't stop David. Yeah. He still felt strongly about doing this thing. And so he ended up giving the job to Solomon. He said that when Solomon became king, because he just said there was too much blood on his hands for him to do it. So Solomon built this colossal palace, ornate, very fancy temple. It was just known all over the world, just for this place where they had their worship. And so that's where it was for several hundred years until the Babylonians came in and destroyed everything.
Right.
And that was just so horrifying for them. I compared it on Sunday to like 9/11, which is coming up for us here, the anniversary of that. But for them to have their place of worship, desecrated and destroyed like that. And so, but what's interesting in the question, I'm just going to skip ahead. We could talk through some more of that stuff. You can watch the sermon and hear how I unpacked it. But the question is are there things that we've built? I mean, and God certainly used the temple. And he wants them to rebuild the temple. I mean, it was important for them to get that back into the center of their faith life. But are there things that God accommodates that we built or constructed, maybe not a physical building, but things that the church has done that God's used that, but that really wasn't God's plan. He just kind of accommodated that. And so, and I was thinking and used the example of like when I go to so many churches have become like coffee shops. You notice that you go in and it's like coffee's everywhere, and like you go out in the lobby and it's like a coffee shop lobby, and I got to thinking about how I wonder what God thinks about that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with coffee.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's attracted people, but I think sometimes people have approached church in the same way that I approach my local coffee shop.
Yeah.
I have this unwritten contract with them. It's never been stated, but when I go in, I expect it to be a certain way. I expect there to be good coffee. I expect them to be pleasant. I expect there to be good music that's not too loud, not too soft, on a station that I like. I expect for them to have some treats when I want a treat, but I don't want to be pushed on a treat.
Right.
And so the parallels, I think, are pretty obvious to church. People come as a consumer, maybe. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I was listening to you kind of break down the Bible story, and something that kind of struck me as you were talking about it was how David wanted to build the temple over the tabernacle area, and and it made me think of like, a lot of times people will compare and contrast the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and be like, oh, the God of the New Testament was so much more loving, but even God sending that vision back to Nathan and going, I don't need all that.
Yeah.
It's still the reminder that God is a God of common people. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not just for the high ups. No matter how fancy they want to make it, it's still open to be seen by people.
And the tabernacle was there for a specific purpose to have it in the center to remind them that God was God,
right?
And that's where their sins were atoned. The law was there in the 10 Commandments. And so all that was very specific to keeping their faith central to them. Yeah. And they made it more into a building, a fancy building, I think, maybe with some intention that but maybe missing the point of what God really wanted out of their worship and the whole point of the tabernacle. Yeah. And it wasn't, they didn't build it on top of it. It actually moved around. I don't know what they did with the tent after they got finished building it. They moved the whole the stuff from the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, all that stuff went into that, and the cherubim and all the other fancy stuff that they had in there. But there was a bunch of other stuff that really sort of modeled other pagan temples that were built throughout the world at that time.
Right.
And so, they wanted to rival that. They wanted to outdo that.
Yeah.
Build something better and bigger, to maybe to give glory to God.
Physically show.
But also to show that the Israelites were
biggest and the best.
Yeah, they were biggest and the best.
Yeah.
And so, somehow or another, you would think with such a nice temple that they would have been extremely faithful. Yeah. But in fact, they didn't. They wandered away all the time. They worshiped pagan gods, and ultimately becoming like the culture that was around them is led to their demise, led to the Babylonians coming in and destroying them and taking them into captivity and all of that, because they became too much like the culture.
Well, and I think that's a good way to kind of segue into the question you kind of set that up with is, has the church overall become too consumer? To where it's got to meet certain needs, it's got to have this, that, or the other to even be classified as a successful church or anything like that. And I'll admittedly, I struggle with some of this because in some ways I definitely think we have gotten away from the purpose of what church is for.
Right.
Just the communal gathering of the body to worship God. That's the basic simple function of it.
And to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Yes.
Is, that's what we do.
Right.
Who we are people that worship Jesus Christ and, and love the world and love God and love the world, love our enemies. That's who we are.
Right.
What we do is make disciples.
And in place of that, like we have added a bunch of things that aren't bad by nature. Even you can even argue youth group, or you could argue children's ministry. Like you could argue all these different places and say, like, is that taking away from overall purpose? Are we having too much fun in spaces? But I think there's also a way that, like, we want to do community together. So there's a balance of offering stuff for the community to come be a part of and still keep the root of what the purpose is.
I think you're right, and I would say, like, children's ministry, youth ministry, our adult grow groups, those sorts of things. If they're geared to making disciples, that's why they're there.
Correct.
On the other hand, and I don't mean any criticism by this.
Yes.
I'm looking at Cherokee Connect on the Facebook thing that they put out the other day, and like there's this woman who is church shopping. Mm-hmm. And she's asking these questions about and I get that, but I just somehow or another I think we can get pulled away from our main purpose and mission if we're about, like, how can we please people? And
Sure.
I'm a people pleaser. I want to please people. I want people to be happy.
Yeah.
I want to have the music just right. I want the place to be clean.
Yeah.
I want for the people that come here to be comfortable and feel welcomed and all of those sort of things. But if we lose the focus of making disciples and make it into just being a big community center that offers a lot of programs for people,
Right.
then I think we can get on a slippery slope.
Yeah, and I think you really have to have a metric to define it by, which is part of the reason we created this new vision, but also part of the reason that we keep the United Methodist mission as our main goal. To make disciples is that needs to be something that we keep at the forefront, because all of our programs have the capability to do that, but they also have the capability to just not do that. You know what I mean? To do everything else but that. So to be able to kind of make sure we kind of have that balance in that space, I think is important. But I think I would ask the question maybe back to you is, what do you see as the fine line? Because, I know some people come in like maybe a certain type of music, I believe in the body of Christ that, some people are going to worship better to certain music. Like, honestly, I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to worship. Like, my biggest worship experiences have been like guitar, box drum, no lights, just intentional worship. Do you know what I mean? But I know some people who love the environment setting and the feeling that, like, as soon as they walk into a building that they're preparing their heart to go. So do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many different styles, but are they missing the point maybe? Or is it that, like, have we gotten away from the root of what worship needs to be? Or is it we have just found what works best for our part of the body?
Yeah. I think we have to walk that line. I think we have to continuously be calling people. I think God uses all of those things, and people have different gifts and expressions, and we're trying to reach the gospel however we can,
right,
with people. So that's part of the reason why different worship styles. We have a traditional and modern worship services. Other churches have done even things more unique and specific to reach people. I think it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing, but it's just when it becomes something else. And, sometimes it's kind of hard to put your finger on.
Yeah.
But, are we making disciples? Are we transforming lives? Is it making a difference in the community? If we were to go away, a tornado came over, knocked a church building down, would people miss us? I mean, and I would make the case that they would, not only in just the lives of people who worship there, but in the things that we do in the community. But that as we're called to be the church. So one of the recent questions I was asking, I'm not wasn't specifically talking about Hickory Flat, but I think there are hard questions we should ask ourselves as well. In the opening video, I asked a lot of questions. One of them was, what if the church was more known for who we love, how we love, rather than what we hate?
Yeah.
And what prompted that was I saw a recent survey, and it was asked of like non-Christians who don't go to church of what they believed about the church and what the church was and who the followers were. And the first 4 or 5 things on that list were very negative. A church is that church hates gay people. Church, is, very political. The church has a lot of, they were all very negative, and some of it was, I think, unfair. But the truth is, we deserve some of that. And what if we were more about the love that we practice and how we love one another? And particularly in, the second question was, if we were known more about what unites us and brings us together rather than what divides us, because we're divided in so many places in the culture these days, around political lines, but there are others as well.
Yeah.
And, what if we were looking for those places just of genuine humanity that we all have that cross over and meeting those needs and developing those kind of relationships and teaching people how to have civil conversations and, because love is their greatest aim. What difference would that make? I think it'd make a huge difference. And I think people are so starving for that, because it's so easy to run to our corners and, we know that that's wrong. People know that that's no way to live.
Sure.
But we don't seem to have the tools to dig ourselves out of that,
Well, I think it's hard to go against culture, and I think what we're trying to do is, if we were truly a church that was known by love and uniting versus hate and dividing, like that is kind of countercultural to the rest of the world right now, you know, and not to say that it's all hate or that it's all disunity, but there is honestly a lot of it out there, and we've talked a few times about where that originates and stuff like that. So to be this would be countercultural, and I think people feel sometimes uncomfortable stepping out of the norm. They feel safe in a norm because they don't stick out in one way or another.
Yeah.
But the Bible also tells us that we're like to be a city on a hill, like we're not to be covered by the baskets or whatever. Like our light's supposed to shine. So there is supposed to be something different about the church that the community might not understand, but somehow they're attracted to it, or do you know what I mean? So,
well, I like the metaphor or the example of a lighthouse.
Yeah.
A lighthouse is, there to shine the light and save souls and keep people from crashing into the, through the storms of life under the rocks. I went to a lighthouse one time that was, I guess it was decommissioned, but it was a museum. I was like, well, this really isn't serving the purpose of a lighthouse anymore.
Yeah.
And so, I think churches can do that if they lose their way and they lose their vision. We become like a decommissioned lighthouse that is now a museum, or a restaurant or whatever else you want to put in a coffee shop. So, yeah.
So what do you think are, so we're here as Hickory Flat United Methodist Church, or wherever you go who might be listening, we're as a church body, how do we prevent ourselves from going to museum's sake or going to where we're not really being a part of our mission?
I just think we got to keep calling one another back to Jesus and back to our mission.
Yeah.
And we've got to preach that and live into it all the time. And I'd say, I think we have good bones here. We've got great DNA here because this is a loving, kind church where I do think people put relationships above, having to always be right.
Sure.
The relationships are more important, and I do see me like, when I would say what would we be known for? People were asking. We have an incredible preschool where they love and nurture kids. And our children's program reflects that as well. Here that we have that, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think the mission work that we do and some of the partnerships that we have, and the way that we have given people permission to start missions.
Yeah.
I think of Circle of Friends,
Sure.
which basically came out from a group of our church that just had this vision, run with it, go with it.
Yeah.
And so, that's what we need to be doing, is empowering people to find their purpose that's going to make a difference in the world, transform the world for Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there are good bones here, and I think, in some ways, sometimes it feels like we just need to be pointed in the right direction and pushed, like, here, go this way. And I think that's normal, and I think that's just a constant reflection of us to say, like, what is it that not only does our church need, but what does our community need from the church? And not to say we want to be, like, not to fill in the gap necessarily as like just like a program space, but to really be in touch with our community to say, like, our community needs to know more about anxiety and to offer spaces to where this is a safe place to have that conversation.
To bring that healing and hope to people.
Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's making disciples. But
Right.
there's, it's such a great mission field here in this area, both for young families with children, but also, senior adults. We have so many 55-year-old and plus communities that are going up and around here with, people that are at different life stages. And, we've had a death in our church community over the last week, and having a place of support, grief support, emotional support for people that are experiencing different parts of life,
Right.
So, I'm thankful that we have a lot of that, and there's more to come.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking, one more thing I had written down at the bottom here, Zerubbabel, who was the key guy. He was the governor there at the time, and he was the leader in helping them have this vision of rebuilding the temple, of building the temple again. And God comes through Haggai back to him with this word, and he said that he would be like God's signet ring. And so, you know what a signet ring is?
I actually don't. So
Okay. Signet ring usually has somebody's initials on it.
Okay.
Or sometimes it has like a symbol that's like the logo or whatever. But yeah, that's a signet ring.
Stamp
But,
or something.
traditionally, they're ones that have like your initials on that. So
Okay.
that's such a cool. It's just a cool example for us that we should be like God's signet ring. We should have God's signature on us, God's initials on us, Jesus's, JC, and so that people
Is
see
that what
us
they
as
would use sometimes, like when they would seal
possibly. I think
like
that
envelopes, like
yeah,
they would use that to push
I think that
in?
might be a separate thing, but maybe I don't know where it came
Okay.
from. But I just know that traditionally, at least as long as I've known about it,
Sure.
signet rings, usually have somebody's signals on it.
Okay,
So,
I'm sorry. I was
yeah.
just thinking about it.
Yeah. So anyway, that that was the last thing in the book of Haggai when God came to that, and sort of I think at that point they hadn't even completed the temple yet, but they were well on their way.
Right.
And so it was a good little Bible study to do, those two chapters, and I love the way it ended with what God said to Zerubbabel.
I love when you kind of pick up some of these, what I would consider some of the more obscure books.
Yeah.
Because they have such good stories as well. We talk a lot from the New Testament or whatever, but it's just some of these smaller books that have something, because even thinking about the signet ring is, in essence, that is what we're kind of called to be to our community, right?
Yeah, right.
Where we're supposed to be this symbol, this signal of our God and our Creator, and to show Him through through the things we do or the way we act as a church, or do you know what I mean? So
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's such a cool illustration, and I love diving into these books, these smaller books, a little more.
I'm doing. Wait till we get to Leviticus next. I think February is when I've got it penciled in.
Right on.
I'm going to do a series on Leviticus. I've been saying that I was going to do it for a while, but
Yeah.
I really want to do this. I mean,
Okay.
it'll be fun. I
Well,
promise. But that's
I'm
not.
sick all of Feb. No, just joking.
But we are looking at another book, and it is a more popular one. It is in the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's the book of James, or the letter of James.
Is a great book.
And so we'll start that this coming Sunday.
Okay.
And James, I'm calling the titling the series "Practical Lessons."
Yeah.
Because there's so much practical advice in there. They called James, I've heard it referred to as the Proverbs of the New Testament, because it's just a lot of wise sayings in there.
Yeah.
And so we'll be learning about that, and I'm excited about preaching that series too, because it'll be a fun one, because there's so much good stuff. Maybe a lot of good stuff for us to talk about.
I'm excited for it. And as always, that these are such great times, great topics to just talk through things, and would love to have your input, your comments, anything about what do you think about the church? Are we doing a good job of being the signet ring in our community?
Mm-hmm.
But also, what do you think of when you think of consumer church, or anything back about that? We'd love to just continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Comments.
Yeah, and don't hear me. I'm not beating up on the coffee shop approach to church. I mean, whatever draws people. I'm just saying, is there a line where it quits being church and becomes something else?
Yeah.
A museum.
Are you focusing too much on the coffee and not on God as
Right.
much? Or I get it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing inherently wrong about all this stuff, but if not put in the right perspective,
Sure.
it gets
100%.
It could get hairy.
Yeah.
But yeah, drop comments, drop an email, deepdive@hickoryflat.org. Do you got anything else to add, Dave?
Nope. I'm good.
All right.
Good. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you guys watching, always giving us some time, and we'll catch you next time.
And go Dogs
Go Dogs.
on Saturday.
That's right.
Yeah. That'll be fun.
It will be.
All right. God bless everybody. Bye. See ya.